Julius is a political genius.
There's been a lot of talk about the MK party being a real game changer in this election. Do you go along with that view?
30 years of democracy where people still live under such precarious existence. It just shows the massive failures of the ANC.
This could be actually a 2/3 majority governing coalition.
I mean, that's the best case scenario. That's my dream.
Spread the fire. Welcome back to SMWX. And today I am really excited to be joined by a thinker, an activist, an author, and someone who you have requested for 5 years that I bring onto this channel. Finally, I have brought you Mr. soon to be Dr.
Yes.
Andile Mngxitama. Bro, thank you so much for joining us on SMWX.
Thank you for the invitation. I'm an avid follower of this show.
Appreciate it. You know, someone was going to knock my door down if I didn't bring you on this show. Every day, someone in the comments says, please bring Andile Mngxitama. So we've delivered.
Thank you for those who have been agitating for my presence in this show. Thanks.
Indeed. I saw you on the stage in an MK t-shirt recently. Of course, the BLF has pledged its support for MK party. It's the party everyone's talking about in this election. What do you think it represents, and why have you lent your support to the party?
Firstly, BLF has been in a very difficult position, particularly in terms of financial support. We're going to have a difficulty to contest these elections. But there's a historical affinity between ourselves and President Zuma. We're one of those who stood with him when everybody was saying Zuma must go. We said,
that's true.
No.
Yeah.
Because we believe it was a big political and ideological mistake to attack him at that particular moment, because he was moving towards the left when he announced radical economic transformation, deepening relations with the BRICS process, talking about free education. He, in parliament, as sitting president, called for black political parties to unite to address the land question. And he attracted attack from Thabo Mbeki. Thabo Mbeki wrote a whole 30-page document saying that Zuma is being un-ANC for calling for black unity. At the time, I thought that Thabo is wrong, but actually Thabo is right. The ANC is not about blackness. The ANC is about non-racialism. And as soon as you say non-racialism, you can't just say black. So President Zuma reflects the ongoing contradiction side of the ANC, where black nationalism keep on rearing its head, and it's been hit on the head. So as black nationalists, we had a clear affinity with President Zuma because we saw where he was going. And that attack happens at the same time in Brazil. The same attack was happening. And as anti-imperialist people, we understood that it's significant that we should stand with him to oppose the imperialist attack on him. Of course, settler capital, mobilizing civil society, mobilizing opposition parties, even those in the left were leading in collaboration with the right wing. I mean, for me, that was a big disappointment to see people like Julius Malema, for instance, comfortable with the right wing in attack of President Zuma. We said, no, this is a big mistake. Zuma must be defended. And he started to articulate a much more radical position. That is the point where all the left groups should have gravitated towards him. So when he announced his move with Umkhonto weSizwe, we sighed a big sense of relief because he clarified and gave us a progressive option for these elections. And that's why our movement was quick to say, we are going to go with Umkhonto weSizwe.
And do you think that the MK party will remain coherent towards the election? And, you know, there's been a lot of talk about the MK party being a real game changer in this election. Do you go along with that view?
Yes. There is the big opportunity, which is that MK will do well in the elections, and that will force and consolidate a left-wing move. Because as I see these elections, it's either a right-wing consolidation where the DA will collaborate with Cyril Ramaphosa, form a government, a right-wing government. Of course, that will be the end of the ANC, but that's a real possibility. On the left side, Umkhonto weSizwe could become the pole which consolidates some kind of a left consolidation. So these elections are clarification of the ideological space, in a sense, because the left wing has been confused. I mean, one time EFF is giving the DA political power. I mean, there's no consistent clarity of the left to understand what the central contradiction is in South Africa. It remains colonial, racist, white monopoly capital. Our enemy is Stellenbosch. So when we go into alliance with Stellenbosch against secondary contradiction, which is the ANC, it shows lack of ideological clarity about what the fight is about. So these elections might just help to clarify the ideological space where the right wing consolidates and the left wing also, on the other hand, it will be forced to consolidate for survival. And that is a good thing.
Why do you think it would be the end of the ANC to partner with the DA?
Because our people are going to be able to see that the ANC does not represent black interests. Because the big advantage the ANC has is the weight of history. Our people believe it represents the liberation movement that fought for freedom. But when it goes into bed like that with the DA, where probably Ramaphosa is the president, one of the DA leaders is the deputy president, the co-governing, that will be the end of the ANC.
Sure.
In the next election, the ANC will be less than 20% of the vote, I believe, once they move in this right-wing consolidated fashion with the Democratic Alliance. It's short-term gain, but long-term, it signifies the end of the ANC.
I remember you being one of the first people to raise the fact that if an opposition coalition came to power, we could have a white president from the DA running South Africa, and that would, be a hugely symbolic moment in South Africa if 30 years after apartheid, we would go back to a white president also coming from a particular ideological perspective, not a progressive white president from a radical party, but from a party that certainly has a history within the apartheid structure. Of course, its history is complex, and yes, there was parliamentary opposition and all of that, but the NP also merged with the DA. Even a deputy.
But that will be a more honest reflection of South African political reality. Because we are run by white power, as it is. But it's hiding behind this ANC, which our people still, sometimes I think about it like if your weapon has been captured by the enemy, but you still have emotional attachment to the weapon, which is now directed at you, which is exactly what happened with the ANC. ANC is properly captured by white capital. I mean, its articulation of policies, the fact that, for instance, they have created the condition for no land expropriation without compensation happening. It has been a political football, and in fact, in these elections, the land question has fallen off. It is out of fashion.
True.
It does not have the same political, currency that it had in the previous elections, and that is part of how the ANC has frustrated the process, watered it down, talking about nil compensation instead of land expropriation without compensation, a very clear statement which was needed. So if the ANC was to fall below 30%, then the DA will probably insist on having its own president. And in that situation, you will have a white president, which will be consistent with the 30 years of the ANC rule, which has been a rule for whiteness. That is why workers in Marikana were murdered like that, because they were black, and bullets of the state, of the ANC state, can be directed at blackness in that way. Just I think 2 days ago in Cape Town, there was a fire in the shacks there, and it killed 2 black people, and scores of others rendered homeless. 30 years of democracy where people still live under such precarious existence. It just shows the massive failures of the ANC. But it's a big success for white capital. I mean, if you look at how much money white capital has made under the ANC government, it shows whose interests effectively are being served by the democratic order of the ANC. So a white president will be just symbolically a reflection of the reality which we have lived for the past 30 years.
To what extent do you think that former President Zuma is complicit in this? When we look at his presidency, we didn't really see big unemployment gains. We didn't see dealing a decisive blow to poverty, and black poverty particularly. On the other hand, you say that there was a shift underway and maybe that shift was cut prematurely. Do you think that President Zuma underwent some kind of transformation while he was in office? And I suppose that's the question for me around MK Party is, to what extent does this represent something new? Or if a party around Zuma comes to power, could they maybe reconsolidate the status quo again?
The presidency of President Zuma can be seen in 2 halves. The first half, he was just going with the Thabo Mbeki project, really, of neoliberalism. There was no serious attempt to move to the left. I think the Gupta element, ironically, is the one that helps to push to the left. Because you see, the Guptas were part of white capital from Thabo Mbeki up to the first stanza of President Zuma. They were friends with these guys, with Rupert and them. But they wanted to enter the economy in a more serious way.
Sure.
And it is clear in South Africa that to enter the economy, you need political backing. And so they were going to piggyback on a radical program, which would have benefited blacks. And the Guptas would have benefited as well. But they were pushing, for that possibility. Look at the mining charter of Msebenzi Zwane, for instance. It says within a year, 30% of ownership must rest with blacks. And it gives over 50% representation in boards. It talks about over 70% of procurement must come from blacks. It's a radical proposition. But the Guptas were going to benefit from that. But it would have also benefited us. And that's why it turned the Guptas into the enemy of white capital. And that when that happened, we were very clear. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. The Guptas were seen as the enemy of white capital because they wanted into the economy much more than white capital would allow. I mean, just look at, they only had 5% supply of coal in Eskom, but that was not acceptable to white capital. White capital came hard on them. If we have time, another time, we'll talk about how Brian Molefe.
We've got time.
Brian Molefe, brilliant industrialist, leader of the economy. If you look at how he empowered the Gupta project through Tegeta, and how he was punishing white capital, and also supporting the 51% black ownership for procurement. It's a brilliant movement how they kicked out this big company and Tegeta took over. But it was the brilliance of Brian Molefe there that if he was given, I think, the position, he was kicked out just about when President Zuma wanted to make him Minister of Finance, I think. If he took that position, would have a completely different framework in terms of our macroeconomic policy, because I believe it's a very progressive, very competent, very skilled leader, and that gave white capital a big fright, and that's why he was one of the people who got chopped in the manner that was chopped. So yes, President Zuma did in the second stanza move towards the left, but the first 5 years it was still really consolidation of the same Thabo Mbeki liberal policies. And as I say, what assisted him to move towards the left was that Gupta factor, including how they started a TV station to counter the white monopoly capital narrative. And it was beginning to work. That's why capital said, no, they must chop off. There was a real big momentum towards radical economic transformation in society as well. The talk was radical economic transformation, and we begin to break it down. What does it mean in terms of the land, in terms of the economy? So there was a excitement towards a possible left shift, and that gave white capital such a big fright. That is why they mobilized 1 billion rand. They gave it to Ramaphosa to hold this radical economic transformation juggernaut. In fact, the friend of Julius Malema, Lord Robin Renwick, they must still tell us what they discussed with him in Chatham House.
You love this London trip, eh?
Yes, Renwick wrote a book after to say South Africa was saved. And he thanked civil society, opposition parties, thanked them for saving South Africa.
Through Ramaphosa's election.
Yes. And also through that removal, agitation, Zuma must go. Basically, he was thanking the whole move. Because remember, the big ideological move was the Zuma must go move, which culminated in the possibility to remove Zuma, ultimately.
Yeah.
So Robin Renwick, this man, who, by the way, was involved in negotiations in Lancaster for the Zimbabwean liberation, where he makes sure land does not come to people. He was involved in the negotiation in Namibia, even here in South Africa. He prides himself for being the man that convinced Nelson Mandela to drop nationalization. He says it. He says, and I spoke to Nelson and we agreed. And so we saw him meeting with Comrade Julius there in Chatham House. Immediately thereafter, of course, some things happened, such as voting with the DA. And I argue that it is part of the two Northern coming together with that imperialist force. Who, as we say, he writes a book and he thanks South African opposition parties and civil society for defeating Jacob Zuma. So Jacob Zuma, clearly you can't not conclude that he was seen as an enemy of imperialism, an enemy of white monopoly capital in South Africa. As he moved towards the left, it was the time that we supposed to have supported him, to protect him, to make sure that that agenda gets traction, but we didn't.
It's interesting because, I think in the Ramaphosa era, a lot of people who opposed Zuma suddenly realized that there was a lot in the opposition of Zuma that was hidden. Let's put it that way. And I think there were a lot of people who just used it for factional reasons within the ANC to bring Ramaphosa to the fore, as you've said. And then suddenly, all of a sudden, all the things they complained about when Ramaphosa became president were no longer important once they got their factional victory. I guess one thing that comes to mind when you speak about the moment of shift, and it's an interesting perspective, because I hadn't thought about the Zuma presidency as that moment of a leftward shift. Why did it have to be through the Guptas? So can't we have it both? We don't need these oligopolistic capitalist elites. Why can't we have a true radical transformation, a true racial justice revolution, and also not necessarily have to have a family like the Guptas or any other family at the center of that. I suppose that's my worry with the Zuma leftward shift. I would be all for let's transform the economy, but why do we need the Guptas to help us to do it?
Well, all revolutions needs a bit of financial muscle. Which black nascent capitalist was going to support a radical shift? I mean, look, the Guptas took a big chance and they got smashed. They got smashed seriously. White capital in this country, if you want to see how powerful it is, look at how they dealt with the Guptas. They took their bank accounts, they criminalized them, they chased them out of the country. So all revolutions need a bit of financial muscle. Which black capitalist is going to risk that possibility? Even now with MK, there must be a lot of black, moneyed people who are sympathetic, but they must be terrified of the backlash that is going to come from the owners of the means of production in this country. White capital still controls what goes on in South Africa. And so, from this point of view, I don't blame President Zuma for going with a family that was prepared to take a big chance. And as we know, they paid heavily for it. When they were not involved in politics, they were allowed to accumulate. They were allowed to make business and so on. But when they developed a political spine and wanted to challenge white capital like that, they got smashed. Together with President Zuma, together with all radical economic transformation proponents. I mean, they went for Hlaudi, they went for Brian Molefe, they went for Machela Koko, they went for Sis Dudumieni. There's a long list, including some businesses who will tell you now that they are no longer able to make money, they are excluded. There's a consolidation of the Stellenbosch economic oligarchy in the state. So it is a political battle which really reflects the economic battle. The South African ruling class, which is different from the ruling party, is white capital. And that is why, I mean, including this guy, Markus Jooste, look at how he's treated. When you read the mainstream press, he's the genius. He is almost valorized. He's not seen as a criminal, the biggest criminal in South Africa, by the way. If you look at the quantum of the monies that he's involved with, he should be the face of corruption. But no, again, showing that the consolidation of white capital is able to mobilize the old tropes of racism to justify, self-perpetuate, making South Africa still a big challenge for racial justice. We have not done well in the past 30 years. In fact, South Africa remains a racist reality.
How do you analyze President Cyril Ramaphosa's term in this context? We're 5 years into this term. What do you think it's meant, and how would you evaluate it?
I think Ramaphosa has been able to use this notion of accumulation through crisis. So there's been massive crisis in the state institutions. Take Eskom, for instance, is a good example how they mess it up. And SAA, which they managed to sell. Accumulation through crisis is that you create a crisis to justify particularly privatization of state assets. So our people will also say load shedding, so much load shedding, it's fine, let's sell this thing. And then in this way, his friends would accumulate. He's made a lot of money for white capital, including the IPPs. independent power producers, where they talk about this new energy process, but it's part of the accumulation. So they mess up ESCOM with the hope that this private capital will come in and gobble up the whole system, and in this way will be beholden to private capital, just like they did in the healthcare system, which the public system, healthcare system, has been left to the rot, basically. And creating, therefore, in South Africa, two societies proper, like Mbeki was saying, that South Africa is a two-nation state. One black, excluded, poor, and one white, well taken care of, and with a tiny middle class, black middle class, being absorbed into it. You know, Steve Biko basically had anticipated this. He says, if white people were clever, they'll just stop apartheid. And only 30% of black people will be absorbed into the white system, while 70% will be excluded. He says, if they were clever. Years later, the Broederbond also realized that, in fact, the ANC does not want to destroy South African society, racist society. ANC wants inclusion. By the way, even from the beginning, when those early coconuts, as I call them, started the ANC, they were pissed off that they were excluded. They wanted inclusion. That's why they went to, the Queen.
Yeah, and they wrote all those nice letters.
Yes, asking for inclusion, not obliteration of the colonial system.
They recognized the Queen as their head of
exactly,
state.
Exactly. So inside the ANC, there's always been this contestation between that black radicalism of Bambata, because remember, 6 years before 1912, Bambata had just been defeated, and Bambata represented that moment of black nationalism, radicalism, the centrality of the land question. But these guys, they came in with notions of rights, liberal kind of stuff. And the land question became eroded as part of the key moment in the liberation struggle. That's why in 1955, the ANC was able to say the land belonged to all who live in it, both black and white. 1955, how could you say that? You are surrendering the birthright of the majority Africans to the settler colonialists. You're giving settler colonialists the same amount of claim to land as the indigenous dispossessed people. So we are not so surprised that 30 years later, the ANC has not been able to address the land question. And that is why Thabo Mbeki was able to say, Zuma is wrong to say blacks must unite to get the land back. Because Mbeki is consistently ANC. He does not like the idea of black unity. He says, which people? Our people is everyone, both black and white. If you are consistent ANC, you have to always bring in the colonizer to bring equilibrium of claims. But you can't have that without addressing the original question of what bring the conflict in South Africa between black and white, which is the land question. So the whole orientation of the ANC, therefore, was accommodative to the colonial reality. And that is why part of the reason why 30 years later we have not transformed South Africa. It's because of these ideas of the ANC of accommodation instead of obliteration of the colonial system.
I wonder if we come back to the election then, what that means for what happens after the 29th of May. And what prospects you see for a true, more radical path for governance within the ANC. Because there is a danger, even if, let's say, for example, and I'd be interested to see what kind of configurations you think would be optimal. Would it be ANC, MK, and EFF? Would it be just ANC, MK? How would whichever is the smaller partner in that arrangement guard against being gobbled up by the ANC? and allowing the ANC's ideological confusion, which I agree is dramatic, to actually forestall any true push from the smaller partner.
Yes, as I keep on saying that we are going to see either a right-wing consolidation, which will be ANC, DA,
Sure.
or a left-wing ANC, EFF, Umkhonto weSizwe.
Right.
And that will be the most interesting configuration, if you like. And there's going to be serious ideological contestations as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
It is possible that that configuration could become right-wing in practice, as it fails to address the real questions.
Just to stop you there, that's a fascinating insight, because everyone in the mainstream press on the right is talking about this as the doomsday. It's going to become this left wing. Normally when power has been seized in South Africa, it consolidates very carefully.
No, absolutely. And the ANC factor will be a stabilizing factor towards, if you like, a careless radical shift.
Sure.
We might get into some kind of a redistributive economic system, where certain concessions for the working class and the poor would be extracted from that deal. So a deal between EFF, Umkhonto weSizwe, and the ANC has the potential to make concession to the excluded, because they're going to be worried about, after their tenure, what are they going to show for that arrangement? So white capital will be forced to make concessions. So that arrangement is the best for the excluded majority. And the ANC will have to justify its existence also by showing results. And these two parties will want results as well to justify moving with the ANC. So there will be, as I say, a much more redistributive economic arrangement. And white capital, by the way, is going to come to the party because it doesn't want a total left shift. White capital is going to say, well, guys, we must make a contribution. You know, for white capital in South Africa to contribute towards justice, its interest must be seriously threatened. It has not happened. And that's why, you know, when the ANC was coming into the country, they started that BEE process. They were creating a middle strata through some kind of economic concessions. So we need to create another bloc, radical bloc, which will force white capital to come to the table and make big concessions. But only if its interests are threatened would it make those concessions. For instance, on the land question, white farmers don't need all that land, actually. They're just holding it. But if there's a real threat for land to be redistributed, they may themselves start saying, okay, this is our contribution towards national reconciliation. You know, the biggest, I think, shock of South Africa is that white people in this country, through colonialism and apartheid, have not been asked to make any restitutional moves. White people there's not tax, you know, that says this is a reparation tax. There's no reparations fund. There's no, white people benefited from colonialism and apartheid and are keeping into those privileges without any form of restitution. So if we are so organized, and again, black people have only one real weapon, and it's our numerical strength. Unlike the black Americans, they will never be able to achieve anything because they are perpetual minority. Here we have the one big weapon, which is our numerical strength, which white capital is very clever. That's why they're creating these small parties, giving them 15 million rand there. The open armors are very active in the political system to fragment this big weapon that we have, which is the political power, which emanates from our majoritarian position. Now, we must consolidate that and then become a real threat to the colonial arrangement. And I'm saying we might not need to do anything radical. White capital will come to the party and make concessions, plead for its position. And in this way, we'll be able to get concessions for our people and move towards a redistributive economic reality on mining, on land. Also, finance, capital. Everybody must come to the party and say, this is my contribution. But we can only make that possible if you consolidate the black bloc. And already these three parties will be a significant move towards that bloc. And then you can get the PAC and Zuma to come and, because ideologically they're quite consistent. They can help to consolidate a black agenda, because that's what we need.
It's actually conceivable. Let's say the ANC, if the ANC got 45, it's more conceivable. But let's say they got 40 in the worst case scenario for them. And then MK got 10 and EFF got, which would be 50. EFF got 15, which would be 65. And then you have ATM, you have other parties that could take it to this could be actually a 2/3 majority governing coalition.
That's the best case scenario. That's my dream. And then we simply agree on a national agenda that addresses these big questions. We are done. It can be done. It's within reach, in fact. We'll just have to pull the ANC.
Kicking and screaming.
Absolutely, because the big stumbling block towards a left consolidation is the ANC. Because the ANC could go with the whites of the DA and then consolidate a right-wing government. And all these possibilities for change would then be postponed.
There could even be a 2/3 majority on that side.
Absolutely. And we can imagine what they will do to consolidate white power, to block. They'll kick out affirmative action. They'll kick out the triple BEE. They will not do anything that affects white agenda. We'll all just become workers, and probably they'll throw some things at us. And that will be it. It will be a consolidating of the apartheid reality once more, but properly now under the ANC and the DA rule. That's the nightmare.
We were talking about the prospect of an MK, EFF, ANC coalition. What do you think what kind of program do you think would unite that? And I'm also thinking of former President Ramaphosa.
That's correct.
Yeah, because the EFF has said any deal will start with Ramaphosa must go. So I wonder what do you think would be the program and the non-negotiables in forming that bloc?
That bloc must be governed by radical economic transformation. That is the minimum program. And there we're talking about land expropriation without compensation. We're talking about the Reserve Bank. We're talking about proper minimum wages, free education, the whole transformation agenda, basically. So there must be key points which are non-negotiable. So,
do you think President Ramaphosa is one of those?
President Ramaphosa, see, if Ramaphosa sticks with the ANC and he comes into that arrangement, I think that is going to be the biggest setback. Because his handlers and his economic fraternity is not going to allow for a redistributive government. So he is a key stumbling block towards the consolidation to the left. We don't know if the ANC can be persuaded to get rid of him. But there must be some kind of mechanism that allows for, if we were to agree on that minimum program, also individuals should not matter so much, because we will then push for the implementation of that program. And those that resist will have to be dealt with within that arrangement. It's a political process. It's a political struggle. It's a two-way political struggle. It's a little bit like this is a united front. And we know that Mao Zedong went to a united front with Chiang Kai-shek, and Chiang Kai-shek's army started shooting the forces of Mao Zedong. So moving into that arrangement, it's got its own pitfalls. So it's going to need shrewd political management. But if we were to agree on the explicit points around radical economic transformation, then I think management might be possible. But the right wing inside the ANC is going to try to wreck that arrangement. So it's going to be a fight. It's not going to be easy. Bringing the ANC into that situation is bringing the enemy camp basically into your doorstep. So it's going to require serious political management and ideological clarity and unity of the radical forces inside of that arrangement.
I think what would certainly also happen is that mainstream media would go into panic mode, and it would be pandemonium, and suddenly this media that has so lost its voice under the Ramaphosa administration would suddenly find its voice.
The right-wing backlash will be massive, make no mistake.
International and local, yeah.
And local. And there will be money coming into consolidating the right-wing, which is marginalized. Because remnants of the DA and all these other parties which will be excluded from that arrangement will be properly funded. There will be a real big pushback, which may be so big, in fact, that it undermines that arrangement. Society will be mobilized. And if this left-wing arrangement fails to deliver quickly, it will find itself under serious strain, and it might be removed by a right-wing sweep. So again, contradictions are going to be sharpened. And they will be sharpened inside that arrangement because we're bringing in a right-wing ANC, which is coming there for survival. It is not convinced ideologically about the efficacy of this arrangement. And MK-EFF are pushed more by some kind of ideological move towards a left project. So it's very unstable arrangement, which is going to require, as I say, very careful management. We'll see. But it's still the best possibility for transformation in South Africa. Otherwise, you have the right wing, which will just roll back even the little gains that that we have had. And that right wing has money, is organized, will have the media on its side, so its propaganda will be very effective. And our people are available basically for a right wing or left wing possibility. I mean, our people are already saying it was better under apartheid, you know? Some people are very openly saying it's best if we bring white rule. So
Cape independence is being spoken about on.
Yes, and white people, of course, they want their enclaves to consolidate their power. That Cape independence story is part of how they want to maintain white privileges. If they lose them in the broader South African society, then they want to create a little Boerestad there where they can reproduce these white privileges again. We must not allow it. This part of the project that must be defeated. But we can only do that if we have a clear agenda and we're united. And unity has been one of the biggest elusive aspect in black political life. Hopefully, it can be done. You know, Steve Biko was captured and murdered at a time when he was talking to the ANC and the PAC and the New Unity Movement to create a united, consolidated liberation movement. And Craig Williamson, this spy of the ANC, got to know these new talks that were happening around OR Tambo, that he was supposed to go to Botswana, and Biko was to be flown out with a small aeroplane to meet OR in Botswana. Thabo Mbeki writes about this in a book called We Write What We Like. So we, as black consciousness people, believe that the consolidation of black political parties in this way will be the realization of the dream that Steve Biko died for, where we have real black unity to exercise the one big weapon we have, which is political power that emanates from our numerical strength. We are self-sabotaging by this fragmentation of the black bloc. And white capital is sponsoring further this fragmentation because it is very clear, it understands the dangers of a united black bloc. And we have to understand the advantages of the united black bloc and work towards it relentlessly. We can't all want to be leaders. We must occupy our different places, support black unity.
Can I ask you, as we conclude, about Julius Malema, on that note, because obviously you were a member of the EFF, you knew presumably Mr. Malema, you had a falling out, you had ideological differences. Do you think that he has the capacity to play a role of now stabilizing this coalition? And where do you see his role in South African politics as one of the few people who's probably seen how he works up close before?
Julius is a political genius. If you work closely with him, you'll realize how sharp he is, what kind of photographic memory he has. He remembers things. He remembers an old lady we met in that village who stood there by the tree, remember? He sees things. He's a very gifted chap. And therefore, he's got a big future in the South African political scene. I just hope he was more consistent ideologically. When we joined EFF, we brought in Thomas Sankara, and I was hoping that he'll be seduced by Thomas Sankara's ideological and leadership ethos, which is selflessness. That did not go very well. In fact, we put in the founding manifesto the Sankara Oath, which says public representatives must use public services. Because in that way, if Cyril and Julius must worry that if they're sick, they must go to Baragwanath Hospital, then Baragwanath Hospital will be taken care of. And in this way, society will benefit. But when we left, they also removed from the founding manifesto of the EFF that Sankara Oath, because we knew that they were compradorial and we wanted to lock them into a progressive ideological ethos. But they rejected that for this opulent, compradorial lifestyle which Fanon is so careful warning us against. Because once you do that, you are available to the white agenda. So Julius presents real possibilities, but as I say, he might present the biggest danger to radical transformation in South Africa, precisely because of his affinity to this compradorial lifestyle. And in fact, he does say that doesn't want a revolution. He says that people cannot have an unled revolution because that revolution will consume everyone. So he's a disciplining force for the consolidation of a right-wing agenda right now. And that is why he has no qualms to give the DA political power. I mean, somebody must still explain to me how is it progressive, how a revolutionary gives and normalizes giving a right-wing party of land thieves political power. How is that tactically consistent with the strategic objective of attaining the revolution? It doesn't make sense to me at all, because what it does is just normalizing giving political power to whiteness, and as we will see now, with the possibility of this right-wing consolidation, the better enemy will basically form a government with Ramaphosa and will be back to square one.
Just any writing projects from you? Any new books on the way? I know you're doing your PhD.
Yes.
How's all that going?
Yes, I'm right at the beginning of my PhD program.
Great stuff. All the best with that.
Thank you. Which I have been postponing for a very long time. And I am taking up a battle with what is called the Vets History Workshop, which claim to be doing decolonial work already in the late 70s to its zenith was the mid-80s. And it influenced South African scholarship in a big way. But I am going in there to show that, in fact, that project itself reproduced coloniality. So I'm taking a big fight there.
Absolutely, as usual.
Yes.
No, great stuff. Andile Mngxitama, we thank you for joining SMWX, sharing your views with us and our audience, and we hope to have you back one of these days.
Thank you. MK will be in Parliament, and maybe President Zuma will come back to power.
I hear you.